Hello. So, as was just mentioned in the introduction, our topic is green, smart, livable cities. And I think that central to this topic is mobility, that the way that we're going to move people and goods around cities is critical. And my colleagues and I have spent significant time in recent years studying the impact of changes in mobility systems on cities. And we're convinced that, on one hand, many cities and their mobility systems are simply on absolutely unsustainable paths. But on the other hand, there is hope, and there's hope for tremendous improvement in these systems that will make the lives of city dwellers better everywhere. These changes are going to be driven by a combination of unavoidable technology changes. We'll talk a little bit about those. But also there's demographic and societal changes that are going to help shape these mobility systems that we're discussing. Before we dive into these solutions and how we can fix mobility in cities, I'd first like to take a little bit of stock of where we're at and where we're headed. So cities are the heart of the global economy. They're responsible for roughly 80% of global GDP. And what we've done is we've estimated that the cost of poor mobility, the cost of bad mobility in cities, is roughly 2 to 4% of GDP. So 2 to 4% of wasted GDP in cities. These losses are due not only to poor health outcomes from air pollution, as you would expect, but also due to the lost productivity, as millions of drivers are locked in a seemingly endless congestion. Currently, cities consume about 75% of world's energy. This is an outsized proportion, even given the larger population and the growth rates. And as a result of this energy consumption, cities are responsible for the majority of global greenhouse gas emissions. The WHO, by the way, estimates that there's roughly 3 million premature deaths per year due to air pollution, much of which is caused by automotive solutions. And also, congestion is worsening in every single major global city. Further, on top of this, demographic trends are working to make the issues that I just described even worse. So it's already been mentioned a couple times today, but in case you weren't here earlier, today we've got roughly 40% of the world's population in cities. That number is going to skyrocket, and over the next couple of decades, it's going to be over 60%. So well over half of the world is going to be in cities. And that is going to exacerbate tremendously each of the problems that we've said, specifically around pollution and specifically around congestion and poor mobility systems. So we're going to see rapidly increasing demand for personal and commercial mobility in our large global cities. And if we do not do anything, emissions are going to continue to rise, creating choking smog. Congestion is going to worsen, resulting in a never-ending gridlock. And clearly something has got to give, as the existing infrastructure in our cities simply cannot cope with the strains that we're putting on the system. So the question is, how do we ensure that we achieve this in our cities and not this? So there's no single cure-all solution for mobility. The speed of transformation and the impact of disruption is going to be different for each type of city, across regions, across city types, and the fundamental elements of the solutions to our mobility problems are already becoming clear. The technology trends that are going to shape the future of mobility are connected, autonomous, shared, and electric. The megatrends that I've described here, they're already well known in industry. They're often described by acronyms such as CASE or ACEs. And the industry consensus already is that these are going to be the trends that shape the future of mobility. And we're already starting to see their potential impact. When we look at connected, what we're describing here is pervasive connectivity. Not only are you today connected 100% of the time with the phone in your pocket, but there's lots of IoT devices coming as well. And just by the end of the decade, by 2020, we're going to see around 50 billion devices connected to the internet that are not cell phones or laptops. So lots of devices connected, including vehicles and mobility systems. When we look at autonomy, depending on who you believe, we could see fully autonomous cars within a couple of years, or maybe it's going to take a decade. Regardless, it's coming. And over the last 7 years, so since 2010, more than $25 billion has flown into autonomous technologies and shared. In 2017, we're going to drive billions of shared miles. And the growth rate of shared mobility users, so the number of new adopters of shared mobility, is on pace with the adoption curves of Facebook and WhatsApp. So it's coming. And then finally, electric. One only needs to walk around this auto show to see that vehicle electrification is a real trend. In 2017, we're going to sell around 1.2 million electric vehicles. That translates into roughly a 50% CAGR over the last few years, and as we see more and more models debuting, we're going to expect that growth trajectory continue. So it's clear that sharing, autonomy, connectivity, and electrification, those are the technology trends that are going to shape the future of mobility. But there's some other important trends that are going to decide exactly how those technology trends manifest themselves in cities. So not only how mobility systems are going to look, but also the pace at which they're going to change. Some of those are infrastructure, how we're going to pay for infrastructure and invest in it, the introduction of new types of public transit systems that are more flexible and more adaptive than rail and bus, the decentralization of the grid as the cost of solar and wind continue to fall. Critical are really the last two, I think, the regulatory environment. That's clearly going to play a central role. So we already see the implementation of congestion charges and environmental zones in European cities. There's the license plate lotteries in Asian cities. There's the diesel bans in places like Barcelona and Paris that are being discussed. There's a total ICE ban coming perhaps in the UK and Norway. And then there's the aggressive electrification program that's already underway in China and being discussed in India. So as the problems of smog and gridlock worsen in urban areas, we expect that the regulatory environment in cities is going to continue to stiffen. And then additionally, commerce. Our buying patterns are shaping mobility. As commerce moves more and more online, total commercial delivery is going to skyrocket, 40% more over the next 20 years. And same-day or instant delivery, which today is insignificant but is growing rapidly, could be a quarter of all deliveries within the next decade. So this rise in commercial delivery is going to also put an outsized impact or put an outsized strain on our mobility systems because commercial vehicles have a lot more negative externalities than passenger vehicles do. They tend to pollute more because of their utilization and their higher idle times. They also tend to cause a lot more traffic because of their frequent starts and stops and slower average speeds and often blocking of lanes. So the trends in commerce are really troublesome. Each of the trends that you see here, I think that they, in and of themselves, they're important and they're going to shape mobility systems and have real impact. But interestingly enough, what I think is really going to change systems is the fact that all of these trends are roughly coming simultaneously. So each one individually would be impactful, but the fact that they're all coming at the same time is really going to completely transform mobility networks. We analyzed a lot of the compounding effects that are represented by the arrows you see here. I won't step through all of them, but just a couple, three quick examples. If we look at an uptake in shared mobility, that could help vehicle electrification because higher utilization helps the economics of electric vehicles. And we estimated that for every 10% in increased shared vehicles, over the next 15 years, you would sell 5% more electric vehicles. A second example is autonomy. Autonomy could lead to a better competitive proposition for shared vehicles, greatly reducing the per mile cost of transit for everybody. And a final example is an uptake in shared and autonomous mobility could unleash a completely new segment of public transport of a new form factor of high occupancy point-to-point vehicles, and that could really eliminate urban congestion problems. So all of these trends, like I said, have a great potential to reinforce each other, leading to an acceleration in the transformation of our mobility systems. Now, we took a look at many cities, and 50 cities in particular, to really see how these trends could play out in different city types. And so if we consider dense developed cities like London, dense and advancing cities like Beijing, sprawling suburbs such as Los Angeles, or dense developing cities like Mumbai, clearly the way in which the trends that I've introduced are going to impact the cities and manifest in cities is going to be different. The types of mobility system transformation we'll expect to see will be dependent on the specific circumstances of different cities. So we at McKinsey, together with Bloomberg, we've described some of the likely trajectories and some of the likely development scenarios that we think cities of these different types will develop. Today, I'm just going to give you the example of just one, and it's kind of our best of the best scenario. We call it seamless mobility. And we think development like this is plausible in dense developed cities. So in a city just like this, the lines between public and private transport start to blur. Residents enjoy a door-to-door, point-to-point system, on-demand system that's truly multimodal, really convenient and seamless. From a technology point of view, we have a rapid uptake of electrification and autonomy, which drives down vehicle emissions, alleviates congestion, and then the entire system is underpinned by an integrated network This network connects the very fragmented pieces of today's mobility into an integrated, seamless whole. And so in the end, this is truly mobility as a service. This vision, though, only deals with the movement of passengers, and that only solves half the problem. As I mentioned before, commercial transport has an outsized impact on a lot of the problems of smog and congestion. This requires the advent of a whole host of new technologies, but when we look at improving the movement of goods through a similar city, we find many potential solutions that can help. We've taken a look at a long list of potential commercial traffic solutions, and we're of the opinion we think there's about 6 that are really potentially highly impactful and highly impactful in the near term. So they're not quite as exotic as some of the solutions you tend to read about. We see, though, interestingly enough, compared to autonomy and electrification, most of these solutions already exist. The majority of them do, but they faced hurdles in the past in implementation, and they haven't been able to gain significant traction. So the technology trends, though, that we talked about before, things like connectivity and electrification, they can be the catalyst for some of these solutions to actually finally be implemented. I'll give you 2 examples. The first one is increasing night deliveries. So night deliveries can really ease the strain commercial vehicles have during peak hours of traffic periods. And what happens is if you shave just a few percentage points off of peak traffic periods, you have a really tremendous impact on reducing the amount of congestion. In the past, though, residents have not been too happy about loud, lumbering, idling diesels outside their windows at night, and night deliveries haven't really caught on. But with the introduction of quiet electric CVs, right, we can greatly reduce the noise impact of night delivery. Another example is parcel lockers. In the past, they have been ungainly and difficult to use. They're a great option for reducing the number of kilometers per package. You have a whole bunch of deliveries to a single drop-off point, and you can really avoid and eliminate failed deliveries, which is a huge problem in commercial delivery. But with smartphones making notifications and locker access seamless and simple, this is a solution that can finally gain wide acceptance. So that's a high-level overview of a lot of the solutions that we think are going to shape the cities of tomorrow. So in conclusion, I do think we find ourselves at a crossroads when it comes to mobility in cities, and that we do have a potential, that the potential for a better mobility future exists, and improving mobility is the core, that is the essential thing for making cities green, smart, and livable. Thank you.